Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Mind of Medicine, a series dedicated to the exploration of the various organizational, social, and systemic factors that impact our current healthcare environments and how those of us in the healthcare space can contribute to the positive evolution of these environments and realize better healthcare for all. My name is Donna Gabriel, and I am the Senior Director of U.S. Global Education at MedIQ, an accredited provider of comprehensive healthcare education services. I have worked in the healthcare field for over 20 years, and I'm a PhD candidate specializing in mindful leadership in healthcare. I'm honored to be joined today by Dr. Amishi Jha, the Director of Contemplative Neuroscience and Professor of Psychology at the University of Miami. Dr. Jha is a neuroscientist and a leading expert on the study of attention, working memory, and mindfulness. She is also the author of an upcoming book called Peak Mind, which is available in October, published by HarperCollins. I have invited Dr. Jha to speak with me today about the impact of stress on attention, working memory, and learning, and how mindfulness could be used to foster cognitive resilience. So thank you for joining me, Dr. Jha, and welcome.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Great. Now, I have had the pleasure of reading several of your publications, and I've also listened to you discuss your research during Mind and Life Institute programs and TED Talks, and you always give such a wonderful description of attention and why and how our minds wander. So as we start off this discussion and take a deeper dive into the topic of attention and how it connects to working memory and resilience, I wondered if you could just give your description of what you mean by attention and why our minds wander.
Ooh, great question. So attention is such a big topic, and we all know just from our own life experience, it's extremely powerful. Even through the course of this podcast, if we trust the data, it suggests that 50% of our waking moments, we are not paying attention to the task at hand. So even if we have the intention of listening or reading, half the time we're not quite there. So attention, from the way that I think about it, and there's many different ways into this space of attention, but one nice metaphor that I think can help us understand what it is to think of it like a flashlight. So that just like a flashlight or a torch, depending on the part of the world you're in, wherever we direct those brain computational resources, we get privileged access to information. So just like if you're walking in a darkened path, wherever you're pointing that flashlight, you'll get more granular information about what's happening to help you maneuver through. And at the same time, everything that is not having the flashlight shined upon it, is going to be dark. You're just not going to be able to pay attention to that. Now, the problem ends up being that oftentimes the flashlight, our attention, is not where we want it to be. It can get yanked away, often gets yanked away. As I just mentioned, about 50% of the time we're awake and behaving in the world, it's not pointed where we want it to be pointed. Mm-hmm. And so part of the challenge is knowing and understanding and finding out where our flashlight actually is, and then having the skill and capacity to redirect it back to where we want it.
So you say 50% of the time we're not paying attention. So if we're doing a 30-minute interview, we'll only have people listening probably about 15 minutes.
That's right.
What we say.
That's right. We're talking 15 minutes. You better make it good.
Okay. I'll do my best. Well then, so how is attention different from working memory?
Yes. Attention and working memory are sort of close cousins, and one feeds upon the other and vice versa. So if attention is the flashlight, it gets the information into the working memory system. And the metaphor that I like to use for working memory is that it's like the mind's own whiteboard. So, and it's a very peculiar kind of whiteboard, one where there's disappearing ink. So if you think about a whiteboard you might have in your office, it's a nice scratch space. You might write notes there, your to-do list, you might deliberate a problem. But this one would be where in a few seconds, the ink's going to be gone. So to keep anything on that mental scratch space, we have to keep rewriting it over and over again. And the way it gets on the whiteboard is that the flashlight guides the information that is the entry point in. So attention is the way to get information in. Working memory holds and manipulates that information. But the other direction is also true. If something is on our whiteboard, so let's say you're going to the airport and your friend tells you, I'm going to be wearing a pink shirt. So look for me, I'll be wearing the bright pink shirt. So that's in your working memory. Okay, hold the relevant information, pink shirt. And that directs the flashlight to highlight all the pink in the environment. So it's a bi-directional sort of relationship between the two. And it ends up that both systems are kind of compromised by the same sort of factors. So the things that can degrade and disable attention will also degrade and disable working memory.
So it's funny that you say that, because that points me to my next question for you, because a key point in much of your work is how stress can degrade working memory, especially for those who are consistently in high stress environments like healthcare providers.
Correct.
So can you talk more about the impact of stress on memory and the ability to learn?
Yeah. It's a non-trivial effect, just like we talked about, right? You need to have the flashlight in the right space, the metaphorical flashlight. So if you're not paying attention, it will never enter into your brain system. It will not enter onto the whiteboard. And it ends up that the whiteboard, working memory, is the conduit to long-term memory and learning. So if we fail to learn something, typically it's that it never made it in. We were not paying attention. And we know this, right? You get to the bottom of the page reading a book and you have no idea what you just read. You're never going to remember what the words were because they never registered. So the same idea holds here. We need strongly functioning attention and working memory to learn and to remember. And it ends up that stress is one of the most potent forms of kryptonite for our attention. And it goes back to, why might that be? Well, stress yanks around the flashlight of attention. Things like fear, threat, worry, all of these factors that are part of what makes something stressful actually take that flashlight and yank it away from the present moment. And when that happens over and over again, our capacity to get information into our brain, meaning getting it into working memory and then long-term memory, or even fishing it out of long-term memory, is compromised. And this can have real consequences for our ability to function in the world. For groups like healthcare providers, as you mentioned, think about what that means. If your attention and working memory are compromised, not only may you not recall the right rules, like this profile means give this medication, but you may actually be unable to even monitor what's in front of you right now. A patient presenting with some type of profile, you may miss the critical symptom that could indicate what the true diagnosis should be. So it could actually have strong, a practitioner's lapses of attention could have strong medical consequences, bad ones.
You're absolutely right. And I love what you say about failing to learn. It's not a failure it's not a personal failure of the learner. It's because we weren't in the space to let that learning in.
This is not that sort of, it's not the profile of the person, but it is the present moment situation the person is in terms of their mind. So you may be under certain circumstances very easily able to pay attention, fully comprehend, and then retain that information. But if you don't set the circumstances up and your mindset isn't allowing you to do that, for example, if you're extremely stressed or sleep deprived, or have a million tabs open and are checking your text messages and responding to email while you're trying to do something, you will fail at the task of learning.
Perfect analogy, yes. And another major component of your work is regarding the effects of mindfulness practice on this cognitive resilience, on, I guess, hopefully I'm saying this correctly, the ability to let that learning in. Can you talk a bit more about how exactly mindfulness improves cognitive resilience? So what is actually going on in the brain at that time?
Yeah, another great question. So I'll just start out by saying I never thought in a million years as a neuroscientist that I would study mindfulness. It was just not part of my landscape. In fact, the first time I ever heard somebody in a professional setting use the term mindfulness meditation, it was as offensive to me as it would be to physicists hearing about astrology, right? It's just like, this is wrong. This is not serious. But what I realized after I opened up a little bit and tried to really get what this thing was, is that it is one of the world's longest running mental training, brain training modalities. And it ends up that meditation in its various forms, and we'll certainly can dig into mindfulness, are part of the world's wisdom traditions. And why do people meditate? They meditate because they want to have calm, clarity. They want to have a sense of purpose and really be able to live their full lives. When you think about it that way, it makes perfect sense that it would be something that might help train the brain for better attention. And that's, in fact, what we found out. In the early days when I was beginning this work, we didn't know that mindfulness training might have an impact on attention, but that's essentially what we learned. So what is mindfulness, right? We were talking about the flashlight and getting yanked around. We could actually make that mental flashlight go into the future where we're catastrophizing about events that haven't happened, or we can point it to the past where we're ruminating about things that have already happened. And mindfulness is sort of the antidote to that sort of time-traveling mental flashlight. Mindfulness has to do with paying attention to our present moment experience without any kind of editorializing about it or reacting to it. It's like getting the raw data of what is happening in the moment. That means, unlike the wandering mind, where we're talking about with the 50% of our waking moments, it's a mind that's present, truly anchored to the here and now. And so to me, once I learned that, it started bringing up all these curiosities about how we might bring it to the lab. And in fact, the very first group that we worked with was medical and nursing students, because they are all in the process of becoming attending physicians one day, but their attention is already shot in medical school. And so what we did is offered them a mindfulness training program about 8 weeks long, and we test their attention before and after that training program. And for that group, and then moving on to many other groups, what we found is that under high stress intervals, and medical school is certainly one of them, but I would say the life of most physicians and caregivers, medical caregivers, care providers of many sorts, it's very high stress, high demand circumstances. And under those circumstances, as we just described, stress will degrade attention. So the mindfulness training has its impact by giving people daily practices. In fact, a whole suite, you might even call it like cross-training for the brain, a whole suite of practices to strengthen this ability to steady the flashlight in the present moment so that you're not defaulting to fast forwarding or rewinding, but you're able to keep it right where it needs to be. And it does it in two ways: by practicing keeping it steady, where you do something like anchor your attention on the breath, present moment breath-related sensations over and over again. So it's about steadying the flashlight, but it's also about noticing where the flashlight is in any moment, right? So notice if your mind has wandered away and then gently return it back. And sometimes we talk about this as sort of the mental push-up that we do with mindfulness training. You focus, notice, and redirect. And when we do this over and over again, it's not surprising that the brain systems of attention will actually be stronger as a function of doing it over something like 4 to 8 weeks.
That's a perfect description. And I'm writing furiously all the things that I want to take home with me about this. So, many people tuning into this discussion, including myself, are responsible for supporting continuing professional development of clinicians. And I know you were talking about mindfulness training and over the course of however many weeks. Oftentimes in continuing professional development, the programs are singular. So you have an online program or a symposium or a workshop. And so the opportunities are limited for a more in-depth mindfulness training. So, but is there still potential for cognitive benefit from the inclusion of a mindfulness practice as part of a singular program? So before a program begins or in the middle to kind of let people know their mind is wandering? What have you seen there?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because we want practical, applicable solutions, right? Mm-hmm. And most education, I would say, is sort of like, get the knowledge now and then move on. You don't keep going back. You don't think of it like we do with the body.
Right.
You never think, all I have to do is go to the gym once for 2 hours and then my body will be perfect for running the marathon I'm going to run. Mm-hmm. We do think that way erroneously for the mind. It's not the right way to think about it when it comes to attention and working memory and preserving these core cognitive functions that we have. It's not about crystalline knowledge. It's not gaining new technical knowledge. This is about training a system that is prone to being degraded. It gets weakened, and we've got to keep it strong. So the thing to do is to first understand these basic principles like we were talking about. The mind will wander, reminding people of that, asking people to actually be their own best allies, turn off all the extra tabs, make this the purpose of and the focus of your attention. And just like in something like a breath awareness practice, where the intention is focus on the breath, notice if the mind has wandered and return it back, do that with your continuing ed class. Focus on the content, notice, is my mind still there? And then bring it back. So we don't practice mindfulness skills so that we can be better at following our breath. We practice it so that we can be better at doing everything else in our lives. But just understanding the concept will help people first realize, oh, there is a mind that is wandering, and there's something I can do to intervene. So I think that's the first step, is advantage yourself, don't multitask, make this the priority. Remind yourself and have the course content remind the learner that the mind will wander, and allow the learner to synthesize information as they go. So not save it up. We're not trying to be like Siri or Alexa or something where we're just kind of dictating information, receiving information and dictating it in our notebook. We want to be synthesizing. So that's just a general principle of education. We want to go from the flashlight, to be brought into the system, synthesized on the whiteboard, so it'll have the best chances of entering our long-term memory and being retrieved out of our long-term memory for best use. So that's sort of like the how to do it in the moment during a course, for example. But the other thing that could be very powerful for people to understand is if you get introduced to the core principles of mindfulness once, even in an afternoon session, just like you might go to a personal trainer to learn a workout routine, that doesn't mean you never do it again. You learn how to do it, but then you continue doing it. And for mindfulness, what we've learned is that, at least in the work in my laboratory in high stress groups, as little as 12 minutes a day, 5 days a week, can actually have these brain enhancing and brain strengthening effects. So there's a lot of power that can come in an afternoon session, I think, both in terms of understanding the concepts and then beginning to understand how to do the workout that they can continue after.
I completely agree with you. And to your point, I often get feedback that clinicians would likely be turned off if we introduced a mindfulness meditation during an educational program, or if we did some more formal practice. Whether or not that's true, that's a comment I receive often, maybe as a barrier for people to integrate mindfulness into education. But if I'm hearing you correctly, there's ways of doing this in different ways. And I'm wondering, kind of in my head, I call it stealth mindfulness, where they don't know that we're incorporating mindfulness by, do we take moments to pause and redirect so that they can realize their attention has wandered? Do we have them take a breath? Do we tell a story to sort of break up the clinical information? Maybe we pivot to something that piques curiosity, or another or kind of engages their beginner's mind. Have you seen that type of approach in education?
Yeah, 100%. And I would say, let me just back up by saying, I get it. I was one of those people that would have rolled my eyes when you said, oh, we're going to do mindfulness today. It's like, this is serious stuff. I don't have time for that woo-woo, right?
Right.
But the reality is it's not. The reality is, I'm a neuroscientist. I'm not trying to do anything that's not effective. And my life's work is to understand how the brain works and how to make it work more effectively. If it was not working and it was not effective, I would not be spending any of my energy on it. And knowing that gives me a lot of confidence walking into places like the Pentagon or NATO or elite sports teams and talking to them about the brain effects of mindfulness training. We're not trying to waste anybody's time, but we know that medical providers, people that want to learn the new content that continuing medical education allows for, they're serious. They need to know the stuff that is being brought to them. And if they don't learn it well, there will be consequences for them professionally and for the patients that they interact with. So to know that this is a way to advantage, not waste your time, is a good way in. And to know what kind of company you're in of groups that are using mindfulness. We are involved in a project, my lab is involved in a project to bring mindfulness training to all the newly minted one-star generals in the Army. The Pentagon would not want us to spend that time unless they knew that there were beneficial effects. And that, I think, is very helpful. Something as simple as sort of a moment to arrive is a practice that one might consider. So that once you enter the learning environment, you just get yourself there. You're probably rushing from somewhere else, or you're already thinking about the next thing you have to do. Arrive here now. Make the mind ready. Get the flashlight set up and directed, ready to be directed to where it needs to be pointed for the period of time that you're going to be doing the learning. So that's sort of like those kind of simple strategies. I love your phrase of stealth mindfulness, but I don't think we need to trick anybody. I think we just need to educate people regarding what we're talking about. Notice that nothing I'm saying is about having a kind of mental spa retreat. Mindfulness is work. It is a workout. And if we do this workout, we will strengthen our core mental skills in the same way that doing a lot of push-ups and sit-ups will affect our core physical skills. So if we think of it that way, then we don't want to miss the opportunity to get a short workout in to advantage our ability to learn.
Perfect. I think this gives me a lot to take out in the world for sure. Another comment that I get often is that to incorporate mindfulness or to use a mindful approach to education, you need to have a certain level of expertise, and that you need to bring in external consultants or nobody in our organization is trained in mindfulness. So how would you respond to that? Because you yourself have said we all have the capability. We are all born with the capability of being mindful, and we all have it in us. It's not something we have to learn. It is something we have to practice. But if people think they need some sort of expertise to be able to do this in education, what would you say to that?
I think that just like any expert in any field, there is going to be a different level and depth of what is expressed when you have an experienced, trusted guide. That's just the reality. But don't confuse that with the intrinsic capability all of us have, which is to have our attention in the present moment. And so if it's going to be a full program, a manualized, research-ready program, then of course you want to have somebody that's trained to do that. Just like you're not going to have somebody whose expertise is in physics teach about cellular biology. That would make no sense. So you want to have the right level of expert if you're going to take a deeper dive. But if it's going to be integrated in the context of other materials, like another course, I think the key is to know the basic principles and to make sure you're not misleading anybody. So often what happens when people that are not familiar with mindfulness begin to guide novices through it, they may miss key things like never have the expectation that your mind is going to be blank or clear or that you will have no thoughts. Those are all myths. If you are alive, awake, conscious, your mind is going to pump out thoughts. It's a thought generating machine. So that is not the goal. The goal is not to have no thoughts. The goal is not to feel serene bliss and happiness even. Frankly, it's not, by the way, that's a little dangerous to say. It is not to feel happier. Mindfulness is about paying attention to the present moment. And it's not trying to contrive it in any way to see life in a different way than from what it is. So if people know what they're getting into, then paying attention to their breath for 3 minutes will provide a little tune-up for attention for the next probably 15 to 20 minutes of course content they want to be present for. But they shouldn't misunderstand what the 3 minutes is going to provide. They're not going to feel superhuman. They're not going to have a peak experience. They're going to be more centered to be able to experience what is coming next.
That's perfect, because a misconception often with mindfulness is you're not tuning out. We're not taking them to another place. We're actually helping them tune in.
Correct. Yeah.
To what is happening.
Yeah, you're trying to be more here, not less here. This is not an escape strategy. And you want that. You want that for learning. You want that for performing in the world.
So I could talk, like I said, I could talk for hours to you, but our time is coming to an end. And I just want to ask you, I have one last question. If you could provide one action item to the people listening here, to this audience of continuing professional development designers, educators, healthcare leaders, what would that be?
I'd say the broadest high-level guidance or advice would be pay attention to your attention. So as the people delivering the content, you're not out of the loop. You are key. to success in what you're trying to achieve. And paying attention to your attention means knowing where it is and where it isn't. Then you can get curious about how to get it back on track or make things more interesting or hone your message, engage people more, but add attention into the mix of what you consider as part of the goals of the educational outcomes you want to see.
I want to thank you so much for your time and your perspectives today, Dr. Jha. They're very valuable to me, and I'm sure the people listening. And we hope this conversation, to all of you listening, has sparked your own curiosity and inspired you in your own work. So until next time, thank you for listening.